Good morning, everyone, and good day to everybody. Welcome to this webinar this morning, organized by WWF Malaysia with the kind support from the US Embassy in Malaysia, entitled, Why Should You Care About Climate Change? I am Lavanya Rama Iyer, Head of Policy and Climate Change at WWF Malaysia, and I will be moderating this exciting session this morning. But before we begin, it gives me great pleasure to invite our CEO, Ms. Sophia Lim, along with His Excellency, Ambassador Brian McFeeters, US Ambassador to Malaysia, to come on board and start with Ms. Sophia Lim giving you a welcome. Over to you, Sophia.
Thank you, Lavanya. A very good morning to His Excellency Brian McFeeters, the US Ambassador to Malaysia, our honored speakers, Ms. Jainey Bavishi, Director of the New York City Mayor's Office of Resiliency, Tunku Alizakri Alias, Chairman of MAVCAP, and of course my colleague and moderator, Lavanya Rama Iyer, and all of you who have joined us this morning for today's talk. Firstly, I would like to welcome everyone to this first session of 6 from the Environmental Speaker Series that is a collaboration between WWF Malaysia and the US Embassy. WWF Malaysia is pleased with this joint collaboration as we embark on this series together that will no doubt create a conversation about the climate and nature, a conversation that is so important today in order to secure a better future for us and the future generations to come. Ladies and gentlemen, the earth is warming. That is an undeniable fact. Climate change threatens many things that we work to protect: clean water, safe surroundings, food security, and even community livelihoods. Climate change affects everyone, and whether we like it or not, it is an issue that we need to address head-on. We are honored to have our speakers and subject matter experts with us today who will no doubt share with us the importance of confronting climate change and changing the way we do things. As Ms. Jainey will explain, it is critical that we prepare for the disastrous effects of the climate crisis through climate resilience. And as Tunku Alizakri will share, it is up to the younger generation to push the way forward towards a sustainable economy. I have no doubt that the conversation that we are having today will inspire all of us to do our part in our fight against climate change. Your contribution, however small it may be, is significant and essential and will make a huge difference in our collective fight. Our nature needs every bit of our help that we can to provide for it to continue, and in return, it will provide benefits to us. I would like to take this opportunity to thank His Excellency and US Embassy for this meaningful partnership. Lastly, I would like to wish all of you a fruitful and enlightening session. And to close, let me share with you a quotation in the words of Sir David Attenborough. The truth is, the natural world is changing, and we are totally dependent on it. It provides our food, shelter, water, and air. It is the most precious thing we have, and we need to defend it. And as we say in WWF Malaysia, together possible. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sophia. And now I would like to call upon the US Ambassador to Malaysia, Ambassador Brian McFeeters, to say a few words, please, Your Excellency.
Well, good morning from Malaysia. Selamat pagi. I'm really happy to be here this morning for the launching of this important environmental speaker series in collaboration with the World Wildlife Fund for Nature and a dedicated embassy team. I want to start out by acknowledging WWF for their impactful work in Malaysia and around the world. I understand it's evolved from saving species and landscapes to addressing broader environmental threats like climate change and its many consequences, including work with the government of Malaysia. So thank you to the entire WWF team led by Executive Director Sophia Lim, who we just heard heard from for your cooperation on this program. I also want to thank our speakers, Jainey Bavishi from the New York Mayor's Office, Tunku Alizakri, and our moderator Lavanya for joining us today and sharing their expertise with us. We're all looking forward to hearing from your experience. So today's session asks the basic question, why should you care about climate change and our environment? And I'm confident that our American and Malaysian experts will have no trouble outlining exactly why we need to care and how we can raise awareness and take action. Sophia just had a very kind of meaningful quote. I'd like to share a quote too. This one, I think it's disturbing, but we need to hear this kind of thing. This is from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the report that just came out earlier this week about the physical evidence of climate change. One of the lines in there that struck me was, climate change is already affecting every inhabited region across the globe, with human influence contributing to many observed changes in weather and climate extremes. So in only the past few weeks, we've seen this: flooding in Western Europe and central China, wildfires in California and Oregon, droughts and heat waves around the globe. These are constant reminders of the reality of the climate crisis that we're already living. So a series like this one, designed to raise awareness and promote dialogue among urban opinion leaders, policymakers, environmental and wildlife NGOs, and related government agencies, is timely and very necessary. This series will not only discuss the issues, it will also explore potential solutions to our climate crisis. Over the next several months, we'll bring together experts from Malaysia and the United States who can educate us all about how the latest technologies and even nature itself can provide solutions to the climate challenges that we're all facing. In a recent speech, the U.S. Special Representative for Climate, John Kerry, said, quote, "No country can solve the climate crisis alone." He called for the world to recognize the climate crisis and mount a response comparable to a wartime mobilization. We in the United States government recognize that international engagement to address the climate change is critical, and we've raised fighting climate change to the highest level of our foreign policy. As you know, the United States has officially rejoined the Paris Agreement on climate change, and President Biden has also launched a whole-of-government process organized through his National Climate Task Force to meet our climate goals. Earlier this year, the United States convened a leaders' summit on climate change, where key countries made commitments to reducing their emissions by 2030. And the Biden administration has committed to reducing U.S. emissions by 50 to 52% over the next 10 years, and has announced bold policies to back that up. The United States is also on a path to achieve net zero emissions by 2050. To get there, our government has analyzed how every sector of the economy can innovate, leverage new opportunities, and cut pollution. Climate change is one of the greatest threats facing humankind today, but our response offers an opportunity to innovate and model of the type of cooperation that will be needed to tackle the challenges of the 21st century, which affect us all as a global community. My team here at the U.S. Embassy will do our part by working closely with the Malaysian government on these issues of critical importance, and we're committed to creating platforms for discussion and access to leading policymakers and researchers on climate change, including the experts we have joining us today. Thank you for attending today. I hope those of you viewing this will join us for future sessions in this series as we mobilize to face the climate crisis together. Thank you. Terima kasih.
Thank you so much, Ambassador McFeeters, for your wonderful words. And now let's get into the session. And, as Ambassador has already mentioned, climate change is the defining issue of our times. Many correctly refer to it as a crisis, an existential crisis. And as Ambassador McFeeters has already referred, hot off the press, the IPCC in its latest report, released just 2 days ago, underscores that urgency. Essentially, it is certain that humans are the cause and that the situation has reached very critical levels. If serious efforts are not urgently taken to reduce emissions, and we welcome hearing what Ambassador just said about the US efforts and strong efforts in this, the situation will continue and we will breach the 1.5 degrees limit within the next 2 decades. Now, the good news is that there still remains a small window of opportunity to take action, and that action must encompass both climate mitigation and adaptation measures. So it is indeed timely, as mentioned by both Sophia and the ambassador, that we are having this discussion today. And we are really fortunate to have two very excellent speakers with us. So may I call upon now our two speakers to come on to the platform, please? Hi, good morning. So let me just quickly introduce our speakers for this morning. Our first speaker is calling in all the way from New York. That's our Jainey K. Bavishi. Thank you so much for joining us, Jainey. Jainey is the director of the New York City Mayor's Office of Resilience that creates strategies to lessen the impacts of climate change and other 21st century threats by strengthening neighborhoods, adapting buildings, improving infrastructure, and upgrading coastlines. Jainey's most recently was Associate Director for Climate Preparedness at the White House Council on Environmental Quality, where she led the implementation of the climate preparedness pillar of the President's Climate Action Plan. Jainey also founded the Equity and Inclusion Campaign, a coalition of community-based leaders in the Gulf Coast region focusing on hurricane recovery. Next, our second speaker is Tunku Alizakri Alias, who prefers to be called simply Alizakri. Tunku Alizakri Alias, or Alizakri, is the chairman of Malaysia Venture Capital Management Berhad, or MAVCAP. Prior to MAVCAP, he was the chief executive officer at the Employees Provident Fund, EPF. Under his leadership, the EPF became the first Asian pension fund to establish environmental, social, and governance (ESG) targets for its portfolios to be achieved by 2030. Prior to joining the EPF, Tunku Alizakri held pivotal roles and key appointments at leading Malaysian companies, including the ICLIF Leadership and Governance Center, Bank Negara Malaysia, DG Telecommunications, and Maybank. He currently sits on the boards of public listed companies IHH Healthcare Berhad and Sime Darby Plantation Berhad. Now, some quick house rules. Each speaker will make a 10-minute presentation, and we will follow this with a panel discussion and a round of Q&A. If you have any questions, please do post them on the Facebook site, and we will try and address your questions during the Q&A session. And I will just cue the speakers at minute 9 like this, okay? So you know. So now, without further ado, Jainey, please, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you so much to WWF and to the U.S. Embassy for inviting me. And it's just great to speak to you all this morning. I have some slides that I'm going to go through. So if the slides could be queued up. Of course, my presentation here today is to tell you the story of how we are adapting to climate change in New York City. Next slide, please. I wanted to give you a bit of context about New York City. It's a city of 8.6 million people, and our population is growing. So we expect to hit 9 million by the 2040s. Next slide, please. And we have 520 miles of diverse urban shoreline. We have 100 waterfront neighborhoods, and the strategies that we are using to adapt these neighborhoods are as diverse as the neighborhoods themselves. As you can see, even just from these pictures, they encompass residential areas, open space, parkland, and industrial areas as well. Next slide, please. Hurricane Sandy, as some of you may be familiar with, was really a pivotal moment for our climate action work in New York City. We incurred $19 billion in damages, 44 New Yorkers lost their lives, and close to 90,000 buildings were flooded. Next slide, please. But we are also very concerned about a future Sandy-like storm. Hurricane Sandy in the 2050s could cause $90 billion in damages and economic loss, which is nearly 5 times Sandy's impact. Next slide, please. But coastal storms are not the only climate change impact that we're preparing for in New York City. We're also preparing for a phenomenon known as sunny day flooding. This is when, during high tides, we experience either water overtopping the coastline, or sometimes the water is actually going through the sewer system and coming up in inland areas, causing the kind of flooding that you see in this image here. We're already experiencing this kind of flooding in certain neighborhoods, in certain very low-lying neighborhoods in the city on sunny days. Next slide, please. We're also preparing for extreme heat. The days above 90 degrees Fahrenheit are expected to triple by the 2050s here in New York City. This means that the most vulnerable residents of our city, the most vulnerable New Yorkers, will be disproportionately impacted, in particularly the elderly and the chronically disabled. Next slide, please. And extreme precipitation is another impact that we're preparing for. Of course, this is another form of flooding, like induced by coastal storms, as well as sea level rise. But extreme precipitation can impact inland communities, not just coastal communities, where there's often less awareness about flooding risk. It's also much more difficult to predict than coastal storms. Next slide, please. So as we think about all of these challenges that face us, we really also feel that we have an unprecedented opportunity to reimagine the waterfront, invest in underserved communities, and really improve quality of life by creating safer and more vibrant neighborhoods. Next slide, please. So I just wanted to describe quickly, give you a snapshot of our approach to adapting the city. Our approach includes 4 key pillars. We are working to protect our coastline with a set of coastal strategies that include infrastructure, but also land use strategies. We are also upgrading buildings. We have 1 million buildings in New York City. And so we're retrofitting where possible to make those buildings safer, and also focused on improving our building code. We are also focused on critical infrastructure and services to minimize disruptions to critical services during and after an extreme event. And we are doing direct outreach to residents and businesses to help them make more informed decisions in the face of a changing climate. Next slide, please. So I'll go into each of these parts of our strategies just very briefly, given the limited time. I do want to also mention that all in all, we're spending about $20 billion in our resilience portfolio across the city, really seeing this as a down payment because the work will continue beyond these initial investments. In terms of coastal strategies, as I mentioned, we're building a new class of infrastructure called coastal protection infrastructure. This consists of things that may be familiar: levees, flood walls, tide gates, berms, basically strategies to elevate our coastline to protect from future coastal storms. The image that you see here is the East Side Coastal Resiliency Project. It's a rendering of a project that we've just begun construction on a couple months ago on the Lower East Side of Manhattan. This is a $1.45 billion project that spans about 2.5 miles and will protect 110,000 residents. The project will elevate the parkland that you see in this rendering, East River Park, and build flood protection at the water's edge. This is really key because we wanted to make sure that we are not walling ourselves off from the water. We're fundamentally a waterfront city, but rather we're integrating flood protection into all the other uses we rely on the waterfront for, whether it's recreation, transportation, views, among other things. We'll also be improving waterfront access into this park through this project and the investments that it makes. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, we're also upgrading our buildings. This involves retrofitting existing buildings. For example, we've made a $3.5 billion investment into upgrading our public housing buildings that were impacted by Sandy. But we're also improving our building code to make sure that we're accounting for future risks in the building code itself. And that, of course, would apply to any kind of new construction or substantial rehabilitation. Another interesting program, which is what the image here depicts, is our Cool Roofs program. Essentially, we're trying to coat as much rooftop in the city as possible with a special white reflective coating so that we can lower building temperatures. These cool roofs actually lower building temperatures by 30%, and reduce energy costs and the need to use air conditioning at all. This strategy is especially effective in dense neighborhoods where greening strategies may not be as feasible as just coating reflective surface and coating rooftops and increasing reflective surfaces. This image, as you can see, shows a before and after shot of the cool roofs in action. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, we're also working to upgrade our infrastructure and critical services in order to minimize disruptions during extreme events. This includes transportation infrastructure, energy infrastructure, water, sewer, wastewater, telecommunications. Some of this work involves working closely and collaborating with private utility providers, and we're also doing much of this work ourselves. There are two images here. One is on the Climate Resiliency Design Guidelines, the image that you see to your left. This document actually takes all of our local climate projections for sea level rise, storm surge, extreme heat, and extreme precipitation, and provides guidance to designers and engineers on how to incorporate those projections into the design and construction of buildings and infrastructure projects. This is now a mandate for all city-funded infrastructure projects. We must take future climate risks into account. And then the image on the other side is image of a report or a local utility company, Con Edison, which is our local energy provider, developed to assess their own climate risk and create a plan for resilience of their own infrastructure. This kind of collaboration is extremely important, and we hope to continue to expand on this effort. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, we're also reaching out directly to residents and businesses so that they can make more informed decisions in the face of climate change. This can be in fairly simple ways, like, for example, we're working to identify vulnerable residents as well as volunteers in the most heat vulnerable neighborhoods in the city. Our program is based on the basic tenet of neighbors helping neighbors, so that the volunteers can check in on seniors and the chronically disabled during extreme heat events, but build relationships over the course of the year. So when we activate those networks, it's a familiar person calling to make sure that these people are staying safe inside their homes or going to a cool space if needed. Similarly, with small businesses, we're conducting risk assessments and helping develop resilience plans. The image here is from an outreach event that was focused on flood insurance and helping residents navigate the complicated process of buying flood insurance. Next slide, please. And then finally, I just wanted to mention that all of our work is grounded in science and equity. I think this is particularly important to mention in the wake of the IPCC report coming out earlier this week. We actually work with an independent panel of climate scientists called the New York City Panel on Climate Change, which will take the IPCC projections and translate them into local projections for the 100-mile radius around Central Park in New York City. So they're downscale projections. They form the basis of our entire climate resiliency portfolio. And the image that you see here is actually of our heat vulnerability index. So we've taken our climate projections here on extreme heat, but overlaid them with demographic data about poverty and race in order to really identify which neighborhoods are the most vulnerable to extreme heat, knowing that often low-income neighborhoods are disproportionately impacted by climate impacts. Based on this map, we are targeting our heat resiliency investments in the places that light up as red, and creating a similar tool for coastal vulnerability as well. So I will stop there. I know my time is up, and I look forward to the question and answer.
Thank you so much, Jainey, for that wonderful sharing. But really great to hear all the very progressive initiatives that New York City is taking, and we look forward to discussing this more during the panel discussion and Q&A after this. Now it gives me great pleasure to invite Alizakri Alias to please take the floor for your presentation. Thank you, Ali.
Thank you so much, Lavanya. So if just give me a sec while I share my screen. Okay. Okay, you guys are seeing this, right?
Yes, it's coming on now. Yeah.
All right, so when I was first invited into this talk, I wanted to go and ask this key question about why should you care about climate change? So when I was looking at this, I was saying, so who is this you that we're talking about? And I was informed by the organizers that it's mainly millennials and below. And rightly so, because if you actually look in terms of our Malaysian population, right, 32.7 million, around 22.6 million are actually in this group of younger 38 years old and below. And around Gen X 5.6, baby boomers 3.9, silent around 650,000. So rightly so, this huge group of people, young people, should be concerned about climate change because this is going to be representing your future. Now, the big question is, again, who is really concerned about climate change? And we are seeing from, well, this is US data, which I think we will be able to extrapolate into Malaysian data, but it very clearly shows that the generation that cares more about climate change is the millennials and younger. In fact, there's been certain studies which has actually shown climate change is the highest concern for millennials and younger, much higher than other areas of ESG like income and social inequality and even labor issues. So this is a very real concern, and I think we can extrapolate this into Malaysia. But unfortunately, who cares if you really care about it, but you are not able to do anything about it if you don't have power? So if you really look into the American data, you know, unfortunately, this baby boomers who actually really holds the power to make real change. And as we have shown earlier on, the data doesn't really, it's not at the point of like baby boomers really care about climate change, right? Whereby in America, 53% of total wealth is actually owned by baby boomers and above, right? Silent generation actually owns around 32% of the billionaire wealth. In terms of companies, 72% of S&P 500 CEOs and 46% are Gen Xers, and 46% of small business leaders are also Gen Xers. Boomers and silent generation also hold 80% of political spending. And Gen X holds 46% of local government's positions. So it's the group that really doesn't seem to care much about climate change, who are the ones holding the reins of power, who are able to make real change. So let's go into Malaysian data. Is this also really true? Well, you can see in terms of from the political arena, right? Out of the 150 MPs of the 14th Malaysian GE, 50 years and above are around that group, with 40 of them aged 40 to 49, 25 only below 39 years old, right? And you can read the rest of the data. And how about in terms of the corporate power? So out of the 5,231 independent directors holding 6,500 board positions as at around 2019, around 40% of the independent directors are the age of 61 to 70 years old. Only 3 to 4% are 40 years and below, right? And if you really dig it down deeper, the average age of a male independent director is 62 years old, while the average age of a woman director is 57 years old. Well, you know, out of all these pictures I can share with you, I can only find one with Tan Sri Zati. I don't know what happened to the rest of the female leaders in Malaysia. Well, you know, and unfortunately, the youngest independent director in Malaysia is around 26 years old, who's coincidentally a woman, while the most senior independent director is 92 years old. So young people, you might care about climate change, but at the end of the day, it's the baby boomers and older who actually holds the reins of power in Malaysia, and they are the ones who are able to make real change, and we have to be able to convince them in order to go and see real change for Malaysia. So what do we need to do? Fight them? I don't think that's going to happen. You know, we have demonstrations. Again, it doesn't work for Malaysia, right? So my idea is that, and how it has also worked when I was leading organizations with multi-generations is, number one, we must accept there is this existence of generational gap, right? Different people talk different ways, and it's what's important to them are also different. Because if you activate the baby boomers and older, they are a powerful bunch. So as you can see from the data on the right-hand side. So let's look at an overall strategy for us to achieve a sustainable world for Malaysia, at least. You know, we need to go and engage politicians and the government to make real change. And the language that they understand, it's about votes at the end of the day. And how about the corporate world, the businesses? The language they understand is money. And when you talk about money, it's about higher revenue and lower costs, okay? So let's go down into the voting system. Now, you know, a little bluebird is telling me that Malaysian general elections is coming up soon. And this is where you as the young people, this is the time for you to go and say that this is important to you. Climate change is important to you, right? You are young, start roaring. Okay, out of the 14.89 million people who registered, 12.3 million people voted, right, for the last GE. And 68% were below 30 years and below. However, you know, the data also shows that Malaysian youth do not seem to want to be involved in politics. From the 3.8 million eligible voters who are able to vote in Malaysia are unregistered. And out of that, 2.5 million are below 30. According to the Merdeka Center survey, right, 70% of young people do not believe that their votes will bring about tangible change and don't think their elected representatives really care about people like them. But is that true? I think we need to go and say that the young people need to start talking very, very loudly, because actually young people are very, very powerful if you take that power at hand. So the first thing that the millennials and younger have to do is remind our leaders in Malaysia that we did commit to the Paris Accord, right? We did commit to SDG, and that we are a climate vulnerable country, you know, unlike what a minister in our the environmental ministry actually mentioned earlier this year, that Malaysia is not. Okay, now I want to go and remind for Malaysia, when we sign up to the Paris Accord, we sign up that we will reduce greenhouse gas emissions to GDP by 45% by 2030. Yeah? But if and we also committed to 50% of our land to remain forested. However, sanity check. In 2014, approximately only 55.3% of the land still remains forested, and that is what we know. So maybe, you know, we haven't taken into account all of that land cut away for durian musangking in Pahang. Maybe when we want to look in terms of our ranking, also Malaysia is ranking at 132nd of the sustainability global ranking. We rank 175th in handling pollution. We are 53rd in climate change. Well, where we are doing relatively well is we're number 23 in energy. And if you think that it's not affecting Malaysia, like what Jainey is saying is already affecting New York, we can see data. Selangor shoreline has already recorded total erosion of around 1,878 hectares from 1984 to 2013. Think City has reported in March of 2021 that temperature increases of around 6.75% has already gone up within 21 years in Ipoh, 6.7% in JB within 13 years, and 6.37% within 32 years for Georgetown, right? So there are real effects that has already happened in Malaysia. Now, young people, what can you do about it? If you think that you can speak through the votes, then speak through litigation. In Europe, the cases of litigation amongst young people taking their governments to court has increased. In Germany, April 29, 2021, Luisa Neubauer actually won a case in Supreme Court, whereby Supreme Court said that the German provisions of the 2019 Climate Change Act was unconstitutional and incompatible with fundamental rights because they lack a detailed plan for reducing emissions, right? So basically, you guys need to go and impose on our politicians, where's the plans like what Jainey had shown for New York? Where are the plans for Malaysia? What is being done about it? Are we aggressive enough? Late 2020, France was also held legally responsible. In October 2020, Portugal, six young people was fast-tracked in the European Court of Human Rights, right? So there is the legal rights. In 2021, 27th of May, the Dutch courts also ordered Royal Dutch Shell, right, to drastically deepen pledge cuts to GHG emissions. So if you feel like your votes don't talk, then start talking through the courts. If you feel like the courts also don't talk, then start talking through the companies that you are invested in. Buy a share in the sectors like the oil and gas sector, the plantation sector, have a voice, because we have seen also minority shareholders, the engine number one in Exxon, managed to remove 3 of the board members whom they felt was not on the page of climate change. So if you want to talk about money, then let's go directly into business. So a survey has actually shown that for Malaysia alone, the sustainability business is worth 300 billion US dollars for Malaysia, yeah, and consumers are willing to pay. So convince the board of directors that I've shown you earlier on that there is real money to be made in sustainability. And if you activate millennials and the woke baby boomers, they will talk with their wallet. It's actually shown here, right? So, and lastly, also, because time is running out, show to them for companies. I mean, I sit on a lot of boards. The war for talent is real and it's huge. And we need to get as many young people into the companies as possible. Show them that you, as the young people, will join companies that are socially responsible. The data actually speaks here, and force companies to really change drastically in order to go and be able to make money, as well as attract the right talents in order to go and make this world a better place. So with my last slide, I truly believe that the way to a better world is not through confrontation, but through engagement. And we need to bridge the gaps between the different generations, and we have to work together in order to go and build a better world. So my contacts is down there. So touch base with me anytime you feel you need to ask a bit more. So thank you very much, and I'll stop sharing in the next few seconds. Okay, back to you, Lavanya.
Thank you so much, Alizakri. That was a fascinating account, tour de force of the demographics of decision making. You touched on many things, and also some very, very practical advice on what we can actually do, why we should care and what we should do. So I think both of you, thank you so much also for, keeping to the time exactly, both of you, 10 minutes, fantastic. And you shared so much in such a short time. So really exciting now to go into a quick round of panel discussions to pick up on some of the interesting points that you have raised. Perhaps let me start maybe with a question to Jainey first. Jainey, you mentioned that New York City is investing a good 20 billion into climate change resilience, and that's just the beginning, right? Could you just let us know what are the sources of this funding? And also, I would like to explore a little bit, are there green solutions that are also being looked at to preserve natural assets in New York City's resilience portfolio? Versus just purely infrastructure-focused solutions? And do you find that there is a benefit in doing that from the funding perspective as well?
Yeah, thanks, Lavanya. Those are great questions. I'm also seeing some of the questions that are coming from the audience, and I want to just first clarify that while I lead the Mayor's Office of Resiliency, there's another office, the Mayor's Office of Climate and Sustainability, that is my counterpart that's focused on reducing New York City's emissions. So there's a whole team of people across the city that are focused on that in particular. One interesting fact is that 80% of New York City's emissions actually come from buildings. And so we've passed a building mandate to convert our buildings to clean energy sources with some ambitious targets over the next decade and beyond. And so I just wanted to clarify that right up front. My job is focused on preparing for the impacts of climate change that we know we can't avoid. And that's the adaptation side of the equation. On the question about the funding, much of the funding that flowed to, that New York City is now deploying for resiliency flowed to New York City from the federal government after Hurricane Sandy. So of the $20 billion we're currently investing in resiliency measures, about 15 billion came to the city after Hurricane Sandy from the federal government, and about 5 billion, the rest of the 5 billion is being invested by the city itself. So it's all government sources. And I think, this doesn't account, of course, for things like individual building retrofits that private building owners may be taking on and things like that. So it's not that there's no private investment, but I think we're still relying on government funding as the major source of investment into climate adaptation and resiliency. The other problem is that much of this funding was reactive, right? It came after a disaster. And I think we're still we're hopeful that with the new administration that there will be more there will be more proactive funding. Excuse me, it's almost 10 p.m. here, so I'm mixing up my words a little bit. But there will be more proactive funding sources for resiliency going forward, which is really much needed. The other question about infrastructure solutions versus natural solutions, we're focused on both. I think that there are some limitations in a dense urban environment like New York City's, where, there's only so many sort of acres of wetlands that we can focus on and things like that. But to the extent that wetlands can be part of the solution, we want them to be. In fact, there's a low-lying neighborhood called Broad Channel in Queens that if you know New York City geography, it really sits right in the middle of Jamaica Bay. The Rockaway Peninsula is on one side and the rest of Queens is on the other. And bridges connect this neighborhood to both sides of the borough. And there was a kind of a derelict marina that needed to be restored, cleaned up, and restored. And we did that. And we restored it into wetlands. They're beautiful now. And we hope that they'll both be a buffer from future storm surge and wave action, but also an environmental education site going forward, because we think that it's so important to, really ensure that we're creating access and opportunities for the next generation of climate leaders to understand these issues. And so that we're investing funding into really building up the infrastructure in order for it to be an environmental education site going forward.
Thanks so much, Jainey. Great to hear all that, and interesting that it's the government that's mainly funding all these efforts in the US. Alizakri, can I ask you, in terms of nature, right? So Jainey has mentioned about resiliency, and we know that nature can do both sides of the equation, help with resiliency as well as mitigate climate change, absorb carbon. What would you advise, to the, Malaysian demographic? Because we are living in a mega biodiverse rich country, one of the 12 most mega biodiverse rich countries in the world. We are actually blessed with a lot of natural abilities to protect us from what is, expected to come with regard to climate change. How can this message, I think the younger generation have a better appreciation of that. And like you were saying, there's a generational gap. How can this be communicated? Because does it have to be communicated as a dollars and cents message? Or do you think there are other ways to convince even current day investors to channel some of that investment towards protecting this very rich heritage of ours?
I'll have to deliver the bad news first, because at this point of time, the people in power, they don't really see the real threat to climate change, or even if they do actually see it, to a certain extent, I fear that people sort of say it's not going to be my problem, right? Because this is going to be the problem in the future. So I just have to go and take care of the issues of today and now. And we know that the issues facing Malaysia goes beyond climate change. In terms of priority, we have political instability also, because without political stability, how are we ever going to be able to go and make any plans moving forward? Now, the thing is, irrespective of which political party comes into power soon, right? We mustn't forget that COP26 is coming up in November very, very soon. And with the latest report issued by the IPCC, it's very, very likely that the data from IPCC will go into COP26. And with COP26 coming into play, that is the body which is going to come up with regulations and policies that will govern global policies and global trade, right? So we're already starting to go and see, for example, in the TCFD from UK, right, where they actually impose very strong regulations from a financing perspective on sustainability. So if you are not able to go and meet certain criteria by 2025, you're not going to be able to go and make any real substantial investments into Europe, for example. So and companies actually and banks especially really took a strong push towards that, and they started changing their asset portfolio into much more sustainable. So when regulations come into play, when it hits them where it hurts, that's when action actually starts taking place. Now I'll be able to share with you, for example, like last year when I was sitting on several boards in Malaysia, it seemed like I was a lone voice in a very, very large, vast, empty amphitheater when I talked about sustainability, because some of the other board directors were sort of like saying, we've got bigger concerns about increasing revenue, about looking at some of our current risks. Sustainability, even 2030, it's a long time away. Let's not talk about that. Which was why when I was in EPF, so for Jainey, EPF actually covers around $250 billion US worth of assets, and we are invested in close to 70% of the companies in Malaysia. So that was why one of the last things I did before I left EPF was to come up with the ESG directive in all of the companies that EPF was in. And when it came from that directive, that was when you started seeing action being taken. So unfortunately in Malaysia, I don't think that our people at the top, people who hold power, they're enlightened enough at this point of time. They need to be pushed. Unfortunately, we are not in a pull agenda, unlike some of the Western countries or the Scandinavian countries. And this is why I keep on urging, like what I had mentioned earlier on, that we as a people have to start talking through our votes. We have, if we want to go and talk to whichever politician that you support or political party, that climate change is real, and then we will support people who take that seriously. We need to go and talk with our wallets, start buying products that is sustainable at the end of the day. Yes, it is much more expensive, and we need to lobby the government to ensure things like food, right? Nutritious food should be a right for us. It shouldn't be something which is only the rich who can actually afford it. Push for regulatory changes in that aspect, but also say we're willing to spend if the options are made available to us. Invest in the companies, buy one share. In oil and gas companies, plantation companies, Top Glove, for example, just buy one share, attend AGMs, and make your voice known. Speak to institutional investors like EPF, because EPF, 70% of the members are actually Gen Y and younger. Speak to them and say, these issues are important. And if you are not going to take responsibility on sustainability on our behalf, we will force you to go and take responsibility via other means. Of course, I'm not trying to instigate a revolution here, okay? I don't want to go into jail tomorrow, but I'm just urging the young people that you have more power than you actually think. It's time for you to take action.
Thank you so much, Alizakri. And thank you for actually raising the bar while you were in EPF as well, in a very important position, and introducing the ESG directive. I think I speak for everybody. We feel our retirement funds are much more resilient now, thanks to that effort. And yes, we all need to speak up, as you said. Maybe that segues nicely into this question that's coming from the floor. And I'll just read it out here. How to encourage corporates to take up more climate ambition that is aligned with national commitments or more? Currently, either they don't care or they take it into their own so-called net zero program that is skewed far away from national commitments. How to make corporates get it? I guess the question is, how do you get corporate ambition to be aligned with the national ambition?
My first question is, what is our national ambition? at this point of time, I think I'm really going to get into a lot of trouble through this talk, okay, through the government. I mean, I have actually urged quite time and time again that it has to be led from the top. It's not enough that we just declare that we are a signatory of the Paris Accord of 45%, but what does that really mean? I've had a real life example in one of the companies that I was sitting on, where they had also committed to 45% reduction in carbon emissions, but they never really took into account what does that really mean. Unlike what Jainey had presented earlier on, she had data, real science-based data, which actually said in order to go and reduce a certain amount of carbon, the impact to the business would be X amount, okay? A second thing also is in terms of the mindset. For a lot of corporates, they see sustainability spending as a cost. I think we need to go and change that mindset, that it's not a cost, it's actually an investment. Because if we actually invest in the right areas, we can actually make real dollars and cents. And similarly, at the governmental level, it shouldn't be seen as, oh, we are forced into this because of our signatories, right? We need to go and say, hey, how much money can we actually lead if we were to take sustainability? For example, Malaysia is actually, we are in the sweet spot for renewable energy from solar. We're in the sweet spot whereby we have a huge amount of solar radiation, but yet at the same time, we also have the geographical areas which would actually be able to go and make full use of that translation from solar into energy, right? But we need to go and have stronger regulatory levels for us to encourage more utilization of solar. Yes, we at one point of time, there was a move towards it, but as at now, I think that has actually lost steam, because some solar companies are also starting to move out of Malaysia because they are saying that in terms from a taxation and incentive perspective, there's not enough push from the governmental angle. So I think first step is at the national level, we need to really define what is our commitment, what is the impact, base it on science, and then start quantifying it in terms of how much we can actually profit out of this, right? People, planet, profits.
Thank you, Alizakri. I think you raise a very important point that it's not a cost, it's an investment, and there are opportunities. There are actually opportunities, and we should embrace this transition as a time where we can make all those three happen, right? People, profit, and planet, all come together. Yeah. Let me now take this next question also from the floor, from the audience. Perhaps Jainey, the question is, how can we continue to raise awareness and mainstream climate change action in view of the current COVID-19 pandemic? I suppose, you can discuss, how that's happening in New York City, how, in light of your reactions or your responses to COVID-19.
Sure. I mean, I think that in New York City, as part of the recovery from COVID-19, we're really thinking about climate action as integral to that. We don't have any time to waste in terms of acting to address the climate crisis. And so, we're actually just moving full steam ahead. I think the COVID-19 pandemic has also raised our own collective awareness that we're able to change behavior to respond to the crisis at hand. I think there was we saw incredible sort of compliance in terms of especially at the height of the pandemic in 2020 around quarantining, mask wearing, and people were willing to do what they needed to do to stay safe and keep their communities safe. I think similarly, we're able to take proactive action still to head off the worst of the climate crisis, and behavior change is certainly going to be a part of that. On the resiliency side of things, which again is the part of the work that I oversee, we've actually seen that some of the investments we're making in terms of adaptation and resiliency for climate change can really pay off for other crises as well. So I described this program, which we actually called Be a Buddy, where we're pairing up neighborhood volunteers with vulnerable residents so that these volunteers can check in on residents during heat waves to make sure they're staying safe. We actually activated our Be a Buddy networks more times during COVID than any other time, because we really felt like we could utilize this network we had created for a different kind of shock that our community was facing. So it goes to show that when we're investing in resiliency, it's not just about extreme weather. we can really make sure that those investments pay off in other ways.
Thanks, Jainey. Could you just quickly share a little bit about what are the challenges you might have faced in building this behavioral change, when you deal with communities?
I think that I feel really lucky to work in New York City because we have a constituency that's quite aware and is really demanding climate action. And it's actually one of the sort of biggest assets I have in my job, because climate change and resiliency investments can be put on the back burner by a local government, only because even in my situation where I have a mayor who really is a climate leader, there's so many challenges facing cities, and often resiliency challenges can feel long-term compared to other issues that the city faces. But in New York City, we have a constituency that's demanding action, and it can't, the action that we're investing in can't happen soon enough. So that's really been an asset. But in terms of, just how we're engaging people, we're engaging communities in the design of coastal protection projects. We're engaging communities in data collection to understand how flooding is impacting people's neighborhoods. We're engaging communities in developing research agendas so that we can understand what we know about climate change, what we don't know about climate change, and what we need to know about climate change, not just from the academics perspective, but also from the people who are living the impacts in their neighborhoods. So our engagement is pretty broad and far-reaching, and we expect to continue to build on that.
Thanks, Jainey. I think let me just post these last two questions to Tunku Alizakri, who touched on both the demographics as well as businesses and their responsibility. So I'll just roll those two into one question, Alizakri, if it's okay. So
Okay.
Question is, how do we attract more young people to excellent sessions like this? Thank you so much for that compliment. Urgent need to build awareness of issues with millennial and Gen Z in Malaysia. And the second question is more on corporate responsibility. Many organizations in Malaysia publish their sustainability statement or report, but the level of trust of the disclosures is very low amongst public, especially when the organization claims to have certain climate change targets. To you, Alizakri, what is your opinion on this matter? What can organizations do to further improve the level of trust in their sustainability report and make it interesting for younger generations to read these documents?
Okay, to your first point, I'm just going to attack it from a marketing perspective, right? Basically, if you want to go and attract more young people, you have to go and see what is important to the young people. So if you look at, like, for social media, you go and get an influencer, to talk about something that they care about. And if the influencer has a large enough following, that's when the followers will actually, really make it important. So you know what, in terms of WWF, instead of, and other organizations like yourself, instead of preaching to the converted, I think it's time for you to go and have a targeted attack to the young influencers out there. From politicians, for example, like the Syed Saddiqs, the Hannah Yos, the Khairi Jamaluddins of the world. Start engaging them, make it as their political platform moving forward, right? Because I think, well, I'm talking on my own behalf. I'm just sick and tired of talking about change for the sake of change. What do we want to change ourselves into? Okay, let's educate the political stars, the young stars, into how to go and profit from taking a climate change platform. Right? Whether they really believe it or not is beside the point. But we know politicians want votes. So help them to go and help themselves to get into positions that they can actually make change, because they have a dedicated level of followers who can also vote them into power, for example. In terms of corporations also, right? So support organizations that actually really show a real interest in climate change activities, right? Talk is cheap. But for young people, really don't just buy things for the sake of buying things. Buy things for the right reasons. Okay, so that's the first part from a marketing perspective. The second part was about disclosure, right? For me, I think I've also always ascribed to the thinking of incentives. Incentivize boards and companies that when you actually make clear disclosures on climate change and your responsibility, you will be rewarded from it. So from a dollar sense, for example, speak to the institutional investors whereby the board of directors will be rewarded for having real, in-depth, solid, science-based reports on sustainability, which is done from their companies. Don't just sort of like do your donations, charity giving, check signing ceremonies. That's cheap and that's greenwashing to me, right? So we need to go and work with the auditors also. The auditors as well as those who actually go through the reports. They themselves need to be trained to be able to ask the right questions. I don't think the PwCs and the KPMGs of the world, at least in Malaysia, right, we are fully trained to ask the right questions from the companies in order to go and ensure that they disclose properly. Hey, and you know what, WWF, why don't you actually go and have a award for the best company that has for the company that has the best disclosure? You know, again, honey attracts more ants or bees. I don't why you would want to attract bees or ants, I'm not sure, but you know, go for the sweet rather than the stick, because I think people are tired of sticks. People need hope, especially young people. When I speak to a lot of young people nowadays, they're devoid of hope. So we need to go and find these beacons of hope, and we need to go and provide real solutions that can actually see real change within the next 10 years, because we don't have much time.
Thank you so much. That's, I think both of you have given us so much to think about and so many practical examples and solutions based on your very vast experiences. We're really grateful. I think we need to wrap up, but I'd just like to offer the floor once more, just for, one sentence. What would you like to leave the audience with? Maybe first, Jainey?
I think in terms of why should we care, I hope we made a compelling case, and I hope that's evident. In terms of what each and every one of you can do about it, ask anyone who's in a seat to make a decision how they're taking climate change into account in that decision. We really need to be embedding the consideration of climate change into everything we do globally. We're certainly trying to do that at the city level in New York City, and I think we still have a long way to go. It's really about building a new culture, a new capacity, a new DNA for how we operate and take climate change into account.
Thank you. And Alizakri, your parting words.
Well, I would like to go and urge everyone here, not just the young people, not to lose hope. There is dawn, through the darkest of times. But it's for us not to lose hope, because when we lose hope, that's when the game is over, right? So as long as we have hope, we have to keep on urging for us to go and change to a better planet. We need to go and activate, not confront people in powers, in positions of power. Engage with them, come up with solutions. Don't just demand, and complain about it, but be part of the solution. Because young people especially, you might think that you are powerless, but you are more powerful than you think you are, as long as you have hope. So keep up the good fight and keep up the good work, and we just have to keep on going until we achieve what we need to do to achieve.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much for your parting words. I think it encapsulates both of you, the amazing sharings that both of you have given us today. With that, I think we have run out of time. Unfortunately, we could actually carry on with this discussion because it's so fascinating, and you're getting so much excellent solutions-based practical advice here. Anyway, thank you so much to the audience as well. You have also posed some very interesting questions, and we hope we can continue keeping this kind of dialogue open, because that's the way that we can keep the hope up and come to those solutions and learn from each other. I'd also like to again thank the US Embassy for the support in organizing this. And last but not least, to the back-end team, thank you so much for making this a very smooth event today. We really appreciate all your efforts in getting all this through. So thank you to the team from both the US Embassy as well as WWF Malaysia. Once again, thanks so much. Thank you, Alizakri. Thank you, Jainey. And Jainey, wishing you a good evening. Thank you so much for sparing some of your sleep time to be with us this morning. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.